Nearly half of us will face depression at some point in our lives. Yet this pervasive condition remains widely misunderstood, leading to inadequate treatment for many who suffer from it. At the core of our collective struggle to address depression lies a fundamental confusion about its true nature. This misunderstanding is compounded by the challenge of distinguishing depression from a state we are all intimately familiar with: sadness. While the two share some overlapping features, depression is far more complex and debilitating, extending beyond the transient situational emotions that define sadness. This blurred line between the two not only obscures the unique and profound challenges of depression, but also perpetuates misconceptions, leaving countless individuals without the empathy, support, and care they so urgently need. We often unintentionally approach cases of depression with assumptions drawn from and better suited to our understanding of sadness. This fundamental misstep exacerbates the suffering of those with depression, preventing them from receiving the understanding and care they truly need. At first glance, there appear to be significant similarities between sadness and depression. Both can lead individuals to cry, withdraw from the world, complain of listlessness, and feel alienated from their usual lives. However, a profound and categorical difference sets the two apart: clarity of cause. A person who is sad can usually identify and articulate the source of their sadness. They might say, "I'm sad because my grandmother has died," or "I lost my job," or "my friends have been unkind to me." Sadness, in this sense, is tethered to specific events or circumstances, making it a temporary and understandable emotional response. In stark contrast, the person suffering from depression cannot easily pinpoint a clear cause for their despair. They may cry, feel utterly depleted, and struggle to find meaning in life, but they are unable to identify a specific event or situation as the source of their anguish. Instead, they describe a more generalized and overwhelming sense that life itself lacks meaning. The sense of despair, they say, is a false corridor that strains the mind from the outside and gets in the way of appropriate thinking and decision-making. They are not depressed about X or Y in the way a person might be sad about X or Y. They are simply depressed in a pervasive, all-encompassing way. This inability to articulate the root of their suffering leaves the depressed individual vulnerable to misunderstanding. Others, often with good intentions, may assume there must be a tangible problem to solve, leading to frustration when no clear answer emerges. This lack of clarity can invite unwarranted judgments, with sufferers accused of exaggerating, malingering, or even fabricating their condition. The well-meaning but misguided attempts of friends and loved ones to uncover a fixable problem can inadvertently deepen the isolation of the person with depression, leaving them feeling even more alienated and unsupported. When pressed to explain their despair, a person suffering from depression might point to seemingly odd or trivial issues. They might argue that going to work is pointless because, in 7.5 billion years, the Earth will be absorbed by the sun. Or they might declare life entirely meaningless after accidentally dropping a glass on the floor, convinced that everything is now irreparably hopeless. Such explanations can sound baffling, even absurd to an outsider. At this point, some might conclude that if depression lacks any clear psychological cause, it must be rooted in a chemical imbalance in the brain. This perspective suggests that the most compassionate and efficient response is to treat the issue with medication, an approach heavily promoted by the pharmaceutical industry, which benefits enormously from such a view. It also appeals to families, schools, and employers who seek swift, cost-efficient solutions to the problem, eager to restore functionality as quickly as possible. Yet there exists another, more nuanced approach to understanding and addressing depression, one that, while slower and more challenging, may prove far more effective in the long run. This approach draws upon the principles of psychotherapy, a discipline that has arguably developed the deepest insights into the nature of depression. Psychotherapy begins with a foundational premise. Despite appearances, a depressed person is not devoid of a cause for their despair. There is always a reason for their suffering. However, the reason is often so complex, painful, or threatening that it has been pushed to the margins of their consciousness. This buried distress does not disappear. Instead, it festers in the unconscious mind, exerting a profound and destabilizing influence. Unable to confront or articulate the true source of their anguish, the individual experiences a pervasive sense of nihilism, with their suppressed pain manifesting as feelings of hopelessness and meaninglessness. Psychotherapy seeks to help individuals uncover and confront these hidden sources of distress, gradually bringing them into the light of conscious awareness. Though this process demands patience and courage, it offers the potential for genuine healing by addressing the root causes of depression rather than merely masking its symptoms. By engaging with the complexity of human emotion and experience, this approach provides a pathway to lasting recovery, one that respects the depth and dignity of the individual's struggle. The foundational principle of psychotherapy is that depression is never as causeless as it may appear. While those suffering from it often feel as though their despair has no explanation, psychotherapy insists otherwise. There is always a reason. The depressed individual is profoundly distressed by something, but that something is so painful, unsettling, or overwhelming that it cannot be consciously acknowledged. Instead, it is pushed to the farthest edges of their awareness, hidden in the shadows of the unconscious. From there, it exerts a corrosive influence on their psyche, manifesting as a pervasive sense of meaninglessness and despair. For those experiencing depression, confronting the true source of their pain would be utterly devastating. The feelings tied to these causes are too intense, too destabilizing for the conscious mind to bear. As a result, they unconsciously opt for a kind of emotional shutdown, numbing themselves to everything rather than facing the unbearable weight of a specific sorrow. Depression, in this sense, is a form of sadness that has lost its memory, its true origins buried, because recalling them would unleash unbearable anguish. What might these buried truths look like? They could be realizations too painful to face head-on. Perhaps we've married someone fundamentally incompatible with us. Perhaps our understanding of our own sexuality is not what we once believed, shaking the foundations of our identity. Perhaps we harbor deep, unacknowledged anger toward a parent who failed to provide the love and care we needed during our formative years. These are truths that threaten the stability of our inner world, truths that could leave us feeling exposed and shattered. To shield ourselves from this level of psychic pain, we unconsciously choose, though the term suggests more agency than is often the case, a state of depression over a devastating epiphany. We accept a relentless numbness as a form of self-protection, insulating ourselves from the searing intensity of these hidden realizations. Depression, then, becomes a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the unbearable insights that lurk beneath the surface of our minds. While this strategy spares us from immediate agony, it traps us in a state of perpetual emotional stasis, where the very act of living feels hollow and joyless. A depressed person rarely feels consciously aware that they lack insight into their condition. They do not sense a gap in their self-conceptualization, and often perceive their despair as something inherent and unchangeable. Compounding this, contemporary narratives around mental health frequently frame depression as a purely biological issue, something akin to a physical illness. This perspective, while sometimes comforting in its simplicity, can serve the interests of the pharmaceutical industry, and even those close to the patient, who may have a vested interest in avoiding deeper exploration of the underlying causes. The idea of being just depressed may obscure the potential for meaningful psychological insight, keeping both the individual and their support network at a distance from the real roots of their suffering. There is another critical distinction to be drawn between sadness and depression. Sadness arises in response to a specific external event or loss. It is a reaction to something out in the world, such as the death of a loved one or the end of a meaningful relationship. Importantly, sadness does not necessarily damage a person's self-esteem. A sad individual may grieve deeply, but their sense of self remains intact. They are heartbroken about what has happened, not about who they are. Depression, however, operates on a fundamentally different level. It is not only an emotional response to external circumstances, but also an internalized attack on the self. Depressed individuals often experience profound feelings of self-recrimination, guilt, shame, and worthlessness. Their despair is not just about the world, but about their very existence within it. This self-loathing can spiral into a destructive cycle where every perceived flaw or failure becomes magnified and fuels further feelings of inadequacy. At its most extreme, depression can lead to tragic outcomes, including suicidal thoughts, as the weight of self-directed despair becomes unbearable. This distinction highlights a crucial element in understanding depression. While sadness can often be alleviated by time and external support, depression requires a deeper engagement with the intricate and often hidden dynamics of the self. Addressing depression involves not only alleviating the symptoms, but also exploring the underlying beliefs, fears, and unresolved conflicts that fuel its intensity. It is a journey that demands patience, courage, and a willingness to confront the profound complexities of human emotion and identity. In psychotherapy, the origins of self-hatred and depression are often traced to unresolved anger that, instead of being directed outward at its rightful target, is turned inward against the sufferer. These feelings of rage, which might naturally be directed toward a partner who is perpetually defensive and denies intimacy, or a parent who inflicted humiliation during childhood, are repressed and redirected. Unable to confront or express this anger outwardly, the individual unconsciously channels it toward themselves, where it festers and manifests as self-loathing. What begins as the thought, "X has horribly let me down," transforms into the far more corrosive but strangely more bearable belief, "I'm an unworthy and unbearable wretch." In this way, self-hatred becomes a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the perceived dangers of acknowledging and externalizing anger toward others. By internalizing these feelings, the individual spares themselves the relational or psychological risks of openly confronting the true sources of their pain. However, this self-directed hostility comes at a devastating cost, perpetuating a cycle of guilt, shame, and despair. It is also worth noting that depression is often linked to an apparently opposite emotional state, a euphoric, hyperactive mood known as mania. This oscillation between extremes is captured in the term manic depression, now more commonly referred to as bipolar disorder. Mania, with its bursts of energy, grandiosity, and unbridled optimism, can serve as a temporary escape from the suffocating weight of depression. Yet, like self-loathing, it is not a resolution, but another facet of the same deeper psychological turmoil. Together, these opposing states form a complex and challenging emotional landscape, one that demands a nuanced and compassionate approach to healing. Mania, at first glance, might appear to be a state of happiness, much like depression can resemble sadness. However, the relationship between mania and happiness is as deceptive as the relationship between depression and sadness. The critical commonality lies in a rejection of self-awareness, a refusal, conscious or otherwise, to confront the deeper truths of one's mind. In a manic state, a person experiences euphoria, but avoids engaging with the painful realities buried in their psyche. This avoidance explains a defining characteristic of mania, an almost frantic need to escape oneself. Manic individuals may talk incessantly about trivial matters, exercise compulsively, work without rest, or spend recklessly. These behaviors are not expressions of true joy, but desperate attempts to flee from unresolved grief, anger, and loss that lie beneath the surface. Mania becomes a shield against confronting these emotions, a high-speed chase away from the self. Every life is inevitably marked by its share of challenges and sorrows, moments of loss, disappointment, and pain that make sadness a natural and recurring part of the human experience. Feeling sad is not an anomaly, but a testament to the depth of our emotional lives and the reality of existence. Yet, even in the face of life's difficulties, there is always a reservoir of beauty and hope to be found. These glimmers of light remain accessible to those who have been given the tools and space to confront their pain, process their anger, and properly mourn their losses. The ability to recognize and honor our grief is essential for healing. When we allow ourselves to sit with and understand our feelings, we create room for clarity and resilience. Only by acknowledging the depths of our suffering can we begin to appreciate the moments of beauty and joy that life still holds. This balance between mourning and hope is not just possible, it is the foundation of a meaningful life. Life's beauty does not negate its pain, nor does its pain diminish its beauty. By exploring the depths of our experiences with courage and compassion, we open ourselves to a richer understanding of who we are and what it means to live meaningfully. With patience, self-awareness, and the right support, we can transform despair into clarity, loss into wisdom, and sadness into a deeper appreciation for life's resilience and wonder. This understanding of mania and depression points toward a clear path to healing. The primary need of someone in depression is not to be told to look on the bright side or to be convinced that life is inherently beautiful. Instead, they need an opportunity to achieve genuine insight into the roots of their despair. For this, they require a deeply supportive and patient listener, someone who can help them explore their inner world without judgment. Temporary use of medication may also play a role, not as a cure, but as a way to lift the individual's mood just enough to make these crucial conversations bearable. The key assumption here is that depression is not merely a chemical imbalance, but a psychological response to undigested, unknown, or unresolved trauma. To truly address it, the sufferer must be allowed to feel and remember the specific emotional injuries they have endured. They need to understand that their feelings, no matter how painful or inconvenient, are valid and legitimate. Crucially, they must also be given permission to direct their anger where it belongs, even if it lands on difficult or uncomfortable targets. The ultimate goal in treating depression is to help the individual move from a state of boundless despair to one of focused mourning. Rather than seeing their entire life through the lens of loss, they need to grieve for something specific: the wasted years, a failed marriage, the hope of a father's love, a dream career that never materialized. While this process of insight and mourning can be agonizing, it is far healthier than allowing unresolved pain to cast a shadow over everything. By identifying and mourning their particular losses, individuals can begin to reclaim a sense of clarity and balance, leaving behind the paralyzing grip of undifferentiated despair.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.